actually grew up on a dairy farm in rural Victoria, one of 7 kids. Big sister, actually, my older brother Frank is here today. And growing up on the farm, I guess was lots of little experiences to be courageous. But nothing was ever, for me, overly scary. It was a pretty secure environment. And I know my father, he certainly had great plans for me as a child. And I remember at about 13, my dad saying to me, Margaret Mary, we were Catholic. Margaret Mary, I see great things for you. I was like, do you, Dad? He said, I see you being Mother Margaret Mary, in charge of a whole order of convents. Needless to say, I had different visions for myself at 13, wearing moccasins, lots of blue eyeshadow, eyeliner like this, and had great permed hair as well. But at 18, I decided it was time to flee the nest, and I moved to Melbourne to go to university, which doesn't seem very courageous, really, you know, to most of us here today. But at the time, it was scary. I was well and truly outside my comfort zone. And over the years, having travelled extensively around the world, having had 4 children in 3 countries, in 7 homes, in 5 years at one point, I've learnt that we grow the most and we accomplish the most when we are prepared to step outside our comfort zone. And in organisations today and in the business world today, given the culture of fear and uncertainty that we live in, what happens too often is people stay, they choose the familiarity of what they know, they stick with the status quo, instead of daring to try something new, to step outside their comfort zone and open up the possibility of doing more and becoming more than they otherwise would. So 2 years ago, I started writing my latest book, Stop Playing Safe, and I decided to interview some people who had really achieved a lot of success in their lives in order to get their insights as well, and why does courage matter to be successful in the business world and in our careers and working lives. And I got to interview people, the head of NASA and the head of UN Foundation, and then back in Australia last year, people like Ida Buttrose and James Strong, because I wanted to know what it is that they had done and what were their experiences of feeling their fears and vulnerabilities, but speaking up and stepping out and being leaders and being trailblazers despite that. And I want to share with you 3 core things. And the first one is that we need to rethink risk. You know, neuroscience now allows us to study the brain, and what neuroscientists have found is that we are innately wired to overestimate the size of risks and underestimate our ability to handle them. On top of that, we're also wired to downplay or discount the cost of inaction. And too often when we think about whether it's speaking up, making a change, taking a chance, trying something new, whether in our business or in any area of life, we focus on the risks, what could go wrong, what we might lose, what we have to spend on the investment, rather than what we have to gain, and we don't accurately consider what's the cost of inaction. And what we know is that life doesn't stay the same. If things aren't going well, they tend to only get worse. And in our constantly changing world, given the dramatic pace of change with technology, given the economy, given the globalisation that's occurring, unless we're constantly adapting, constantly changing and questioning the assumptions about what it takes to be successful 2, 5, 10 years from now, we run the real risk of being left behind. And so we have to be willing to step back and say, what is it going to cost me not to do this? Not to have this difficult conversation, not to make this change, not to try this new thing, because we are innately wired to be risk averse. Last year, it really was drummed home to me the importance of knowing what it is we should be afraid of. Plato once said, courage is knowing what not to fear. And I took my husband and I have 4 children. We went off, having pressed pause on adventure travel for a long time when my kids were young. We went off on a trip to Nepal and we decided to go whitewater rafting. And I thought that was pretty adventurous. I'd never been whitewater rafting before. And we got decked up in our gear, and we had our guides that were showing us, how we row the boat thing, through the rapids. And we got going. Clearly it's not my, pastime. And we got going and we went down the first set of rapids, and they were a little bit bigger than I thought they would be. And then we went down the second set. My kids were loving it. I was screaming very loudly just to entertain them, not that I was scared. And by about the fourth set of rapids, my son Ben yelled out from the front of the raft, "Oh, there's a snake in the raft!" At which point I let out a really loud scream, because I may have grown up on a dairy farm, but I'm not someone who particularly likes snakes. And I moved into the middle of the raft because this snake was just going around the side. There was a little moat around the inside of the raft perimeter. And I was actually, my heart was elevated, and I was thinking, oh my God, we're going to be killed by a snake. And the kids were screaming, and the guide was saying, oh, there's nothing to be afraid of, it's not poisonous. And yet you could tell his legs were pulled up as well. And we were figuring, what do we do with this snake in our raft, whitewater rafting down this river in Nepal? Who knows, what'll happen? And while we were all screaming and I was sitting in the middle of the raft, someone pointed out that we were fast approaching another set of rapids. And it was at that moment I had to choose, what do I be more afraid of? Being killed by what in my head was now a king cobra size snake, or being all thrown out of our raft, having us all, knock our heads on rocks and drowning in a river somewhere in Nepal. I didn't know where I was. The river and the rapids won, and I moved back over to the side, and we made our way through the rapids and beached our raft down the river a bit, where the guides got the snake out of the raft. And I hate to tell you, but it was about the dimension of my finger here. About this long, about this thin. But it brought home to me the importance throughout our lives of really thinking about what is it that we should be more afraid of. And too often we're afraid of what we might lose if we try something new. What we might lose face, we might lose pride if we speak up and have a difficult conversation or we challenge something in a meeting. And we don't have the conversations that we need to have, and we don't pursue the aspirations we really want to pursue, and we don't make the changes that we need to make in order to thrive in our lives and in our careers and as organisations 2, 5, 10 years from now. So really assessing what is the cost of inaction. The second thing is to reframe failure. Marty Seligman, the father of positive psychology, said, you can tell how successful someone will be not by the size of their failures or how many they have, but by how they explain their failures. And too often when we have a failure or we make a mistake or we have a setback, we take it on as something personally inadequate on our part. But our failures don't define us. How we respond to them does. Likewise, our setbacks have incredible opportunities for learning and growth. But as Ida Buttrose said to me when I interviewed her last year for my book, we have to be willing to look for the lessons and the opportunities in our setbacks and be brave enough to take them. And so often we do take it as a personal assault if we don't get what we want, if we're rejected. People don't necessarily ask for what they want. They don't go out there and try new things because that makes us vulnerable to what we're afraid of. But if you knew that whatever happened, you could handle it, if you knew that even if you made a mistake, you'd learn what you could and you'd move on, what would that open up for you? What things would you try that you're currently not trying? When I was in my late 20s, I moved to Papua New Guinea for a few years with my husband and worked in there in marketing. And it was nearing Christmas in 1996, and I was actually 19 weeks pregnant with my first child, and I was having coffee with a client of mine. I was flying to Australia the next day for Christmas. We were closing the office. And we were sitting there, and in stormed 3 Papua New Guinean, what they call rascals. And they came straight into the office I was in. I was in the managing director's office. And they put a sawn-off shotgun at my head and said, open the safe. Just behind me was a safe with a big set of keys. Open it up, missus, open the safe. And I said, I don't know how to. I can't. I don't know how to open the safe. And I really didn't. And they assumed that I would know where to get the cash that they'd heard was on the premises to pay the local staff. And again, they pressed it into my forehead and they said, open the safe, missus, open the safe. And I said, I can't. I don't know how to. And after 30, 40 seconds, felt like 10 minutes, they said, okay, and they told me to lay on the ground. And I lay there with my client while they went off to find the money elsewhere. And after a few minutes, they found it, and off they went. 10 days later, I was back in Australia. Oh, by the way, my boss said I could have the afternoon off that day. And it was a bit begrudgingly, by the way, I might add. And then we flew to Australia, and 10 days later, I was having actually my first ultrasound, first grandchild for this baby, and I was told that my baby had died. Now, I know that a lot of people have had those experiences, but I remember profoundly in the weeks and months that followed, people feeling very sympathetic toward me. They were two very traumatic experiences in close succession. And the reason I share them certainly isn't to garner sympathy. The reason I share them is that so often we let events in our lives that are traumatic, the things that happen that aren't going to what we planned at all, we let those events define us, and we let them keep us from taking the actions we need to take throughout the rest of our lives to accomplish the things that are really meaningful to us. And so, whether it's stepping outside our comfort zone and taking a risk that makes us vulnerable to failure, or whether we suddenly find ourselves outside our comfort zone dealing with circumstances we could never choose, the global financial crisis being one of those situations, we have to take responsibility for how we choose to respond when life doesn't go to plan. And as we all know, life rarely goes to plan. That doesn't mean you don't make plans. It doesn't mean you don't have goals and ambitions that excite you, but that you're willing to be flexible and to adjust as you go along, and to be really mindful and think, don't make these setbacks, don't make mistakes mean something that they don't mean. The third thing I think that's an important message when it comes to everybody really being more courageous in our lives is not to wait for courage. Too often we wait to feel the confidence that we'd like to have in order to do something, in order to have that conversation, in order to say, hey, I'd like to be put in charge of this project, in order to go and to try some new goal and embark towards something that excites us. Courage is like a muscle. The more often we use it, the more courageous we become. The people who are the most courageous people I've ever met, they didn't become that way by always sticking with the familiarity of what they knew. Whether by choice or whether they found themselves outside their comfort zone, they chose throughout their lives to continually do things that really stretch them. And we become more courageous, we become more confident by doing those things that may scare us, but that also inspire us. Nothing worthwhile has ever been achieved with a guarantee of success. Nothing ever will be. We have to put ourselves out there and risk being vulnerable again and again and again. And it's not a one-off thing that we do. It's something we have to be willing to do again and again. And we become more confident. We expand the perimeter of our comfort zone. We expand the perimeter of our courage zone as we move through life and are willing to do that. Successful people do things that others don't. Successful organisations do things that others don't. The number one asset in any organisation is its people. And if you're a manager or you're a leader, constantly asking yourself, what is it that I need to do to create a culture in my team and organisation that makes people feel safe to take risks, to speak up, to push back, to try new things, to innovate? People play safe when they don't feel it's safe to do otherwise. And ultimately, we lead others by virtue of who we are. We can say all the right things, but unless we're walking the talk, we're never going to be able to accomplish what we're capable of, or to be able to create the synergy and the culture in a team for them to accomplish what they're capable of. James Strong, who passed away last month, shared with me last year that what he felt was one of the most important things for a leader to do was to be willing to be vulnerable in the way they communicated with other people. To step out from behind the script that CEOs can stay behind, to stop with the excuses that we're too busy to just connect with people on that human, authentic, real level, and to be vulnerable and to reveal ourselves as human beings. There's nothing that allows us to grow our influence more than when we connect with people as a human being, as someone who isn't better than, but who is someone who has something to share and value to add. And too often I think we're disconnected from the value we have to contribute. We don't own our power to affect change. We think, who am I? I mean, I'm just this little tiny cog in this great big machine. But as Anita Roddick, the founder of The Body Shop, once said, if you think you're too small to make a difference, try going to bed with a mosquito. You know, if you cast your mind ahead 10 years from now, think about how old you'll be. I'll be 37. I know, I look good for my age, don't I? Think about where you would like to be in your life. Think about what you'd like to be doing. Think about what it is you would love to have accomplished in that intervening time. The best way to predict the future is to create it. But for you to accomplish the things that inspire you, for you to create the future that really is meaningful to you and rewarding and allows you to make the impact that you're capable of making with your skills and your talents and your gifts, and given all the experiences that you have till now, is going to take you being willing to step outside your comfort zone, to put your vulnerability on the line, not once, not twice, but again and again and again. So I never did decide to join the convent, but I'd like to finish with a few words from a poem that Mother Teresa once wrote. And that is, to give the world the best you've got. It may not be enough. Give the world the best you've got anyway. Thank you.